This is a special presentation of NewsWatch 12, Mental Health, The Breaking Point.
My whole life has been filled with trouble.
It's not you, it's the illness.
5 years ago, he tried to commit suicide twice in 1 week.
You're talking about people's moms, dads, brothers, and sisters.
Kind of the hidden, dirty little secret.
That hidden, dirty little secret is mental illness, something many of us live with in one way or another, but not something most of us talk about. Tonight, we are going to talk about it because mental illness impacts us. 1 in 4 Americans experience some kind of mental illness. And because it's expensive, in the U.S., serious mental illness costs almost $200 billion each year just in lost earnings. And for those who live with a mental illness or love someone with a mental illness, the costs are far more dramatic.
Finish it, give it to Davey, and then I can leave.
For David Gabriel,
Leave here, leave you, leave everything.
And Peter Quince,
I've been in theater most of my life.
divine lunacy is more than a creative process. It is real life.
A manic person's living room, how Max would, perhaps my son, would have redecorated his own living room in the course of a mania.
Peter's son and mother
Turned into a husk of the woman that she'd been.
were inspiration for this musical comedy, as was David's personal battle with mental illness and the loss of his brothers.
They had a very, very small life. Each one of them did.
This, the stage, the characters, the music, it's their outlet, one they hope helps change our culture's script about mental illness.
We shun them, and it becomes something that we're afraid of, that we want to hide, that we don't want to admit in our families and in ourselves, that we don't commit resources to.
It's a story that plays out in Southern Oregon every single day.
Face the car for me. Do you have any knives or thing on you?
Medford Police,
We started seeing double-digit increases year after year.
County Health,
We've outgrown our space already.
the courts,
Laws need to be changed.
the advocates,
We are full all the time.
and of course, those who live with mental illness.
My whole life has been filled with trouble.
The National Institute of Mental Health says 1 in 4 Americans will have a diagnosable mental illness in any given year. The most pervasive
Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder.
diagnosis is based on subjective observation, as defined in the DSM-5.
You have strep throat, you go in, you get a swab, and they test positive or negative for strep throat, but we don't really have that yet for mental illness.
Most experts and advocates believe the percentage of people with mental illness has not changed dramatically,
The numbers obviously will go up if your population goes up.
but other things have changed.
We are now back to the number of psychiatric beds that we had in the year 1850.
In the 1970s and 80s, state hospitals across the country closed. The goal to return people with mental illness to their own communities, along with federal funding and support.
ER.
Well, that was in the law, but nobody passed any money for it.
Many believe this was a breaking point. For decades, a lack of resources left communities and individuals fending for themselves.
So the idea is that you would have community mental health centers that would provide mental health care, and people would be integrated in the communities. That just never happened.
As a result, those with mental illness suffered in a stigma-steeped silence.
Nobody needs to reach the point that I did.
One of those people, Stuart Whitmore, who in depression's deep hold took a rifle to his face and pulled the trigger.
Our lives are determined by our choices, and there are consequences to all choices.
Suicide is a complex thing. While a mental illness is not the only reason someone may try to commit suicide, it is often a factor. According to the CDC, someone tries to take their own life in the U.S. every 13 minutes, making suicide the 10th leading cause of death in the country. We return to Stu, who has made a rare recovery from a mental illness, depression. In its most pervasive form, major depressive disorder is the leading cause of disability in U.S. adults, impacting 15 million Americans every year.
I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
Stu Whitmore did not always believe that. In the early 90s, Stu was a successful businessman, but alcoholism and depression nearly turned deadly.
I left with a .30-30 rifle, went to a very, a secluded place, put the barrel to my chin. The bullet obviously didn't kill me by a miracle, but it completely blew out my face. So I'm on the ground, just literally drowning in my blood. I knew I was going to die. And it was as if God said to me then, do you want to live or do you want to die?
Despite the suicide attempt, Stu wanted to live. Decades later, and after multiple surgeries,
I lost count after 17. And that was quite a few.
He's now an award-winning author, advocate, and volunteer chaplain. He wants people to know his story of survival.
Nobody needs to reach the point that I did.
Pat Garoot knows this all too well.
Well, he took that rifle and he put it in his mouth and he blew his brains all over the bedroom wall. My brother Tom, dead at the age of 38.
Pat's family is riddled with bipolar disorder and PTSD. It fuels her work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Because the law, the way it is, said we could not get him help, he had the right to be insane.
Like Pat, many believe the wording of Oregon's treatment law needs to change.
Mental health in the law is not good. There's a lot that needs to be done.
Alternate wording would mean more people could be civilly committed and get the help they sometimes don't even know they need.
I was like a lost child inside.
One of those people could have been Clyde Tankersley, who for decades was untreated.
I'm diagnosed with bipolar, manic.
But self-medicated.
Drinking whiskey and methamphetamine seemed like just the right thing.
Instead of a civil commitment,
I was going to go and kill them.
He ended up homicidal and behind bars.
I got in situations that were completely frightening, except for God somehow pulled me out of it.
Clyde ended up in Judge Wolke's courtroom as part of the Josephine County Mental Health Court.
We have people that specialize in medicine, housing, employment, casework, all that sort of stuff. And the team, with the assistance of the mentally ill person, tries to work out a plan to get them out of the criminal justice system.
His experience with the judicial system has not always been so positive.
I thought he was a dirty judge, and before he could even start talking, I told him, I'm coming for you.
Mental health court is just beginning in Jackson County. It's part of an extensive effort to change the way authority figures and people with mental illness interact.
His brother may have shot himself. He was laying.
Medford officer Stephen Metter, along with the entire department, completed a crisis intervention training. We were with him as he met John and put that training to use.
John, I'm Stephen, okay? Listen, you're not in any trouble. We're here just to make sure that you're okay. Do you understand that?
Officer Metter consulted with a 24/7 Jackson County mental health liaison.
But I think him sending pictures of him with the noose around his neck.
And John's loved one.
Has he tried to commit suicide in the past or made any threats to or anything like that? He talks about it a lot.
The decision?
Hey, I'm going to keep you in cuffs until we get in the room, and I'll take him off, okay?
John was brought to Asante's psychiatric care unit. But like so many nights, there was no room at the inn.
Still to come, what happened to John? Plus, we were granted exclusive access to Asante's behavioral health unit, commonly called 2 North. We'll take you inside when the breaking point continues. But first, here's a list of resources available in our communities. You can find these anytime online at KDRV.com.
Welcome back to the NewsWatch 12 special presentation of Mental Health, The Breaking Point.
You know, everybody has heard a 2 North story.
Perhaps you've heard of it. Maybe you know someone who's been there. 2 North is the region's only inpatient crisis treatment center. And inside, things are changing.
No.
You guys don't have to use your judgment or nothing anymore, huh?
Well, I am using my judgment. That's why you're going to the hospital, John.
For Officer Stephen Metter, tonight's suicidal subject call along the railroad tracks in Medford plays out like many others. In cuffs, John heads into the psychiatric care unit, or PCU, on a mental health hold. This was the end of our journey with John, but not the end of his. He and Officer Metter waited in the emergency department hallway for more than an hour.
It's not uncommon for us to bring people in and we have to wait.
The 3 beds in the PCU were full.
It's no fault of the ER department or any department for that matter.
A growing population is one factor, and then there's the Affordable Care Act, which means more people have access to care.
For this level of psychiatric services has increased tremendously in our valley.
There are also just not enough beds. There is only one acute crisis stabilization facility in all of Southern Oregon. It's Asante's Behavioral Health Unit.
In the community, it is sometimes referred to as 2 North, which just means the second floor, the north wing.
For the first time since it opened decades ago, cameras were allowed in.
So hard. It's so hard.
The decision was not easy for Laurel Nichols.
I don't really want the public to see this. I want the public to get the message that despite losing $1.5 million a year, Asante's kept it open.
There are only 18 beds here. The second one opens, it fills. By population, Jackson County should have more than 100 psychiatric beds.
People would be very surprised to know who we treat.
Teachers, CEOs, lawmakers, law enforcement officers, and Asante's own staff have all spent time here.
We treat a large percentage of people that are homeless.
They're not moneymakers.
People that are stabilized, and we can't discharge them because ethically, to discharge someone to the street knowing that they're going to turn right around and end up back in the ER again is just impossible for us to do.
Despite losing money, Asante has decided to invest in BHU.
The fact that Asante is not only committed to keeping the unit open, but dramatically improving it is amazing. It makes me proud.
Asante's foundation is in the middle of raising money.
The fundraising initiative for the behavioral health unit is not easy because of the stigma.
$2.5 million will be raised by the foundation, and Asante has committed to $5.8 million. Combined, it will allow for a new model of care.
We've had our first 2 trainings already. We're able to fundamentally shift how our staff interact with each other and how they interact with our patients.
It changes our perspective from what is wrong with you to I wonder what's happened to you to bring you to this place.
The sanctuary model also increases the beds from 18 to 24 and changes what the BHU itself looks like.
So right now it very much looks like a hospital. The behavioral health unit, it's institutional. So we're hoping that we can eliminate fluorescent lighting, that we can change the flooring to be like wood floors, wood-looking floors, vinyl floors that look like wood. We're hoping that it'll just be much more like a home environment. When we do our remodel, we're going to have many more private rooms. We will not have any rooms with 3 beds.
My reaction to this space is one, honestly, a lot of gratitude that there is a space for these patients to go, and that Asante, despite the choice of being able to let this go and shut it down, they are not. And I also get excited because I'm just thinking forward at what this space is going to look like in the future, because it's going to be completely different.
Inside the unit, one space has already transformed. It's called the comfort room.
They can sit in this recliner and be covered up with a weighted blanket that's actually like a 20-pound blanket.
It looks and feels completely different than everything else.
This is the feel that I want our whole unit to have, is this welcoming, nurturing, respectful environment that cares about you.
The partitions which separate the patients and staff will also disappear. It's a reflection of the hope for the future outside the unit.
The behavioral health unit has as much stigma as people with mental illness.
This is something Laurel hopes to extinguish with this first look inside.
The patients that we have, if you could hang out and spend time and get to know them, you would be filled with joy. And these patients are some of the bravest people I know.
Architectural plans are already underway, and so far, the Asante Foundation has raised $600,000 of its $2.5 million goal.
And we will do our best to treat them, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not.
When we return to The Breaking Point, a look at mental illness from behind bars.
Welcome back to the NewsWatch 12 special presentation of Mental Health, The Breaking Point.
Welcome back. We've already seen the overwhelming demand on care facilities. That, along with a lack of housing assistance for people with mental illness, has essentially turned county jails into the de facto housing system in the United States.
Mental illness is the only illness I know of that you were incarcerated for.
Roughly 20% of the inmates at the Jackson County Jail have a mental illness.
Where you see the name tag outside the door, that's an indicator that this person is on suicide watch. They get a smock, a blanket, a mattress, but they can't have anything else that they can use that might hurt themselves.
Each have been convicted or are accused of a crime. But some, like Josephine County Mental Health Court Judge Pat Wolke, struggle with the fact that many of those crimes are a direct result of delusions or other mental health problems.
It's not right to put people in jail simply because they're mentally ill.
The crimes are as varied as the severity of illness.
Being locked in a facility like this, they will frequently decompensate and get worse.
He's on my list to be seen soon.
The jail's mental health coordinator, Dennis McNamara, is a pretty popular guy.
One, I listen to them. I can take time with them, and there really isn't anybody else here who can afford to just sit down and talk to them about what's going on in their lives. This is an anxiety medication, goes by the name of Buspar.
He also works with the jail's medical staff to arrange medication.
No, Haldol's an antipsychotic. Risperdal, which amazingly looks pretty similar to Haldol, is something that's much more commonly used. It's one of the newer antipsychotics.
These medications can help stabilize a patient, but inside here, there's no ongoing treatment.
As a society, we need to recognize the severity of this problem, and we need to find a humane way to provide treatment for these people. And it doesn't mean warehousing them in jail because they got a disorderly conduct charge. They're ranting and raving because they're hearing voices in their head about people wanting to hurt them.
Once released, a support system, like the Compass House, is vital.
In our first year, we gained over 200 members.
We stopped by during a recent club meeting. The support found here has made it incredibly successful for those members.
96% had zero recidivism, meaning they hadn't been to jail.
And there is a similar success rate when it comes to hospital visits, with 97% of active members having no hospitalizations because of their mental illness.
That community impact is absolutely huge.
This success has not gone unnoticed.
You have somebody who understands how isolating and stigmatizing having a mental illness can be. To walk alongside you, it makes it a lot easier.
All Care Health, one of the Affordable Care Act's coordinated care organizations, has decided to invest in Compass House.
We've provided funding for an outreach coordinator who goes, when somebody's not showing up that's a member of the clubhouse, they go out and reach out to them. They go and reach out to potential new members.
Clyde Tankersley could be one of those new members. He graduates from Josephine County Mental Health Court at the end of this week and plans to move to Jackson County to be closer to his sons.
That I got my boys that somehow love me.
After decades of drug abuse and alcoholism and a life of undiagnosed bipolar disorder, Clyde still has his family's support. I spoke with his son Clayton on the phone. He's really protective of you.
We've just always loved each other.
Clyde is lucky. He still has a support system. Many people have burned so many bridges that homelessness is a huge struggle. A basically non-existent housing system for people with mental illness compounds this problem. However, funding is on its way. A task force is forming right now to help decide how to use $20 million earmarked for this kind of housing in Oregon. Still to come on The Breaking Point. Months into recovery, Clyde's life has stabilized. Find out what he achieved for the first time in his life at the ripe old age of 57.
Welcome back to the NewsWatch 12 special presentation of Mental Health, The Breaking Point.
We want to go back to one of the people we've met, Clyde Tankersley. Since he was a little boy, Clyde says his life has been out of control. Well, Clyde took control back. This was a big moment. It's Clyde's first graduation ever. After a bipolar manic relapse, Clyde got back on track with his treatment plan in the Josephine County Mental Health Court. When his graduation day came, a family member and several friends were there by his side.
When I seen the people that were there and that the ones come to support me and everything, you know, it was awesome. It was great.
Clyde has moved back to Jackson County with family. His diploma is hung up as a reminder of how far he has come. Now, Clyde is one of an estimated 125,000 people in Southern Oregon who has some kind of diagnosable mental illness. You can share your experiences, stories, and struggles by connecting with us. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, and at KDRV.com. You'll also find a list of resources for help on our website. Just search for The Breaking Point. A special thank you to the brave men and women who shared their stories with us tonight. And thank you for joining us. Good night.